The single leather boot Aaron Sawyer found half buried in the Montana snow on that bitter January morning in 1887 was still warm on the inside, and that small, terrifying fact made him start running before he had even finished thinking through what it meant. He had been checking his trapline, moving through the pines along the eastern ridge the way he had done every other morning for the past 4 years, solitary and unhurried and perfectly content with the silence that most men found crushing. The Beartooth Range in January was no place for half measures. The cold came down out of Canada with a mean and personal intensity, and the snowpack along the ridgeline could swallow a man to his waist if he stepped wrong. Aaron knew every hollow and every drift between his cabin and the high meadow. He knew which frozen creek crossings held firm, and which ones would give way with a sickening crack that would send a man plunging into black water up to his thighs. He knew this land the way other men knew the faces of their children. What he did not know, had never once accounted for in all his calculations about surviving out here, was a woman's boot sitting upright in the snow as if it had been placed there deliberately, 3 miles from his cabin door, 2 miles from the nearest trail that a wagon could navigate, and approximately nowhere near anything that could be called civilization. It was a woman's boot because of its size, because of the slight heel, and because of the pale blue ribbon laced through the top eyelets that had gone stiff with frost. A good quality boot, he registered, even as his heart began hammering. Not a homesteader's rough work boot. This was a town boot, the kind a woman wore when she expected to be somewhere safe. He picked it up and turned it over. The sole was worn through at the toe. The inside leather was cold at the opening where the ankle would have been, but deep in the toe, where the foot had been curled in that small enclosed space, there was still the ghost of warmth. She had not been gone long. He looked up and around, scanning the tree line, the open slope below him, the shadowed ravine to the north. The snow was disturbed in an irregular pattern, not the clean prints of someone walking, but something more desperate, stumbling. A trail of disrupted snow moved northeast, away from any reasonable path, deeper into the canyon country where the terrain got ugly fast, and where, in January, a person without full footwear would be dead inside of 2 hours. Aaron Sawyer tucked the boot under his arm and ran. He was 31 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches tall, built by 4 years of mountain labor into something that bore only a passing resemblance to the slender young man who had come up here after the grief of losing his father and his fiancée in the same terrible spring, had made the idea of other people feel like something he could not survive. He ran through the snow with the long, powerful stride of a man who spent his winters hauling wood and his summers climbing rock faces, and he followed the disturbed trail northeast with the single-minded focus of a man who had suddenly realized that being alone was not the same thing as being complete. The trail was not hard to follow. Whoever had made it had been moving without coordination, weaving between trees, occasionally dropping to hands and knees before pushing upright again. He found a place where she had sat against a pine for some time, the snow compressed and stained faintly where her bare foot had rested on the frozen ground. He found a scrap of dark wool caught on a broken branch at shoulder height. He was moving so fast that his breath came in great visible clouds, and the cold air burned in his chest like something swallowed wrong. He found her in the ravine. She had wedged herself into the notch between 2 massive granite boulders where the wind could not reach her directly, and she had pulled her coat tight around herself, and she had her bare right foot tucked up under her left thigh in an instinctive attempt to keep it from the snow. She was conscious, but only barely, and her lips had gone the gray-blue color that Aaron had learned to dread in this country. Her dark hair was loose and tangled with ice crystals, and her face, even in this state, even half frozen and gray with cold, was striking in a way that made something in Aaron's chest do something it had not done in a very long time. He did not stop to catalog her features. He dropped to his knees in the snow beside her and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck and felt a pulse that was slow but present. "Hey," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended because he had not spoken aloud to another person in 11 days. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and they looked at him with the particular expression of a person who has passed beyond fear into the strange, calm country that lives just on the other side of it. "My foot," she said. "I know, I have your boot." He was already working, pulling off his own heavy outer coat, wrapping it around her, not asking permission because there was no time for asking permission. "Can you tell me where you hurt? Anywhere besides the foot?" "My ankle," she said. Her voice was low and had a slight rasp to it, either from the cold or from crying or from both. "I twisted it. That is why I lost the boot. I fell into a drift, and when I pulled myself out, the boot stayed behind." "How long have you been out here?" She looked at the sky, or tried to. The effort seemed to cost her something. "Since before first light. I was following what I thought was a path." Aaron calculated quickly. It was now somewhere around 9 in the morning. She had been out in sub-zero temperatures, 1 foot bare, for at least 4 hours. He needed to get her warm immediately. The cabin was 3 miles back through terrain he could navigate with his eyes closed, but carrying an adult woman through snow that deep was a different proposition entirely. "I am going to put your boot back on," he said. "It is not going to feel good." "Do it," she said without hesitation, and he filed that away somewhere without quite knowing why. He got the boot back on her right foot with the careful efficiency of a man who understood that the kindest approach to necessary pain was swift completion. She made one sound, a single sharp intake of breath, and then pressed her lips together and said nothing more. When it was done, he sat back and looked at her. "My name is Aaron Sawyer," he said. "I have a cabin 3 miles west. You are going to have to let me carry you part of the way." She looked at him steadily. Whatever assessment she was conducting behind those dark eyes, she completed it in about 4 seconds. "My name is Della Ralston," she said. "I am grateful to you, Mr. Sawyer. We can do proper introductions later. Right now we need to move." He got her upright, and she tried to take her own weight on the twisted ankle and discovered she could not, and accepted his arm around her waist with the same straightforward practicality with which she had accepted the pain of the boot. They made it perhaps 50 yards before the terrain, and the snow depth made anything like assisted walking impossible, and Aaron stopped and looked at her and said, "I am going to carry you now." And before she could form a response, he had lifted her against his chest and started walking. She was lighter than he expected and heavier than he wanted her to be, given the distance, but he did not slow down. He settled into a rhythm, adjusting his footing carefully on the uneven ground under the snow, keeping his arms locked around her shoulders and under her knees. She held herself stiffly at first, her hands pressed against his chest, her body telegraphing the discomfort of being carried by a stranger through a wilderness. Then gradually, as his warmth reached her and the alternative reasserted itself in her memory, she let herself lean against him. "You ran to get here," she said. "Your tracks going out are different from your tracks coming back. You were running." He was quiet for a moment, watching where he put his feet. "The boot was still warm inside," he said. "That meant you had not been gone long. It also meant you were not dressed for this country. You knew all of that from a boot. I have been reading signs out here for 4 years." She was quiet then. The snow had started again, fine and dry and sifting through the pine branches above them in a sound like distant whispers. Aaron kept walking. His arms ached and he ignored them. She asked him no more questions for the first mile, and he found that her silence was not uncomfortable the way silence sometimes was with people who did not understand it. It was the silence of a person who was conserving what they had left. At the halfway point, he stopped and set her down on a fallen log and checked her face and hands for the color change that would mean serious frostbite, and her feet for any further concerning signs. He pulled a length of thin rope from his pack and rigged a rough sling that he could loop over his shoulders, shifting her weight more evenly. It was inelegant, and she bore the arrangement with a dignity that he found remarkable. "What were you doing out here, Miss Ralston?" he asked as he worked. "There is nothing out here. The nearest town is Harlow's Crossing, and that is 22 miles by the Valley Road." "I was on the Valley Road," she said. Or I was until the stage overturned. He looked up sharply. The stage overturned. On the switchback above Dutton Creek where the road narrows, a wheel dropped off the edge. The driver was thrown. She paused, and the pause had weight in it. He did not survive. Was there anyone else? A man named Hollies, a cattle buyer out of Billings. He was unconscious when I left him in the stage. He was breathing. I was trying to find help. Her jaw set in a way that suggested she had been over this sequence of events many times in the past 4 hours and had found no comfort in it. I went the wrong way. Aaron was already reconfiguring his priorities. How long ago did the stage overturn? Perhaps an hour before first light. So 5-6 hours now. Is Hollies injured badly? His head was bleeding. He had not woken when I left. Aaron got her back into the carrying arrangement and resumed walking, but his mind was working through logistics. If Hollies had been unconscious for 6 hours with a head wound in an overturned stage on the switchback above Dutton Creek, the man might already be beyond help. But the stage was on a known road, and if anyone had come through since first light, they would have found it. He would need to get Della to the cabin, get her warmed through and stable, and then ride for Harlow's Crossing. The cabin came into view through the trees just after noon, a low, solid structure of squared logs chinked with moss and clay, with smoke still rising from the chimney because Aaron never let his fire go out in January. He had built it with his own hands in the summer of 1883, and it was the only truly unambiguous good thing that had happened to him in the years since his father died. It had no pretensions to beauty, but it was sound and warm, and it was his. He got the door open without setting Della down, and brought her inside and put her on the single cot that sat along the south wall. The fire was still burning in the stone hearth, and the interior of the cabin was warm enough that Della's breath stopped misting immediately. He saw her shoulders drop a full inch as the warmth reached her. "Stay still," he said, and pulled off her wet coat and her boots, the good one and the compromised one both, and wrapped her in the 2 wool blankets from the cot. He built the fire higher and swung the iron kettle over the flame, and then he got a basin of water from the covered barrel that he kept from freezing with a ring of heated stones, and he sat on the edge of the cot and took her bare right foot in both his hands. The frostbite was superficial. The skin was waxy white across 3 toes and the outer edge of the foot, which was bad but not catastrophic. He had seen worse and worse outcomes. He worked with careful, deliberate hands, not rubbing, which would damage the tissue, but holding and warming gradually, watching the color come back by degrees. Della watched him do it. "You know what you are doing," she said. "I have done it to my own hands twice," he said. "You learn. Does it hurt yet?" "It is going to." It did. The return of circulation in damaged tissue produced a pain that was both sharp and deep, and Della gripped the edge of the cot with both hands and endured it. Aaron watched her face and she watched his, and they sat in that shared concentration for several long minutes until the worst of it passed and the color in her foot resolved to the deep pink of returning blood, and she let out a long, slow breath. "Thank you," she said. "There is more," he said. "The ankle, may I?" She extended her foot. The ankle was swollen significantly, the joint tight and hot to the touch. He probed it with careful fingers, feeling for the distinct wrongness of broken bone, and found instead the softer, more diffuse damage of a severe sprain. He got a length of clean muslin from the wooden chest under the cot, which he kept stocked for exactly these kinds of necessities, and wrapped it with practiced efficiency. While the water heated, he put together a meal of the kind that he had come to understand the body needed after extreme cold. A dense venison broth from the pot that lived perpetually on the back of the stove, corn bread from yesterday's baking, dried apple. He brought it to her on the short board that served as a table, and she ate it with an appetite that was entirely unself-conscious, and he found himself sitting in his one chair watching her, and having to remind himself to look somewhere else. Della Ralston was, he estimated, somewhere around 27 or 28. She had the kind of face that was built for expression, dark brows that communicated her thoughts ahead of her words, a mobile mouth, cheekbones that were high and sharp and threw shadows in the firelight. Her hands, now that the cold had fully left them, were fine-boned but not soft. These were working hands. She was not a woman who sat in parlors. He did not know what she was yet. He knew that she had kept her head in conditions that would have broken a significant number of men he could name, and that she had the sense to accept help when it arrived, and that she had told him everything he needed to know in the clearest possible order of priority, with no wasted words. He realized he was thinking about her in ways that went beyond the immediate practical requirements of the situation, and he stood up and put on his other heavy coat. "I need to go for help," he said. "For Holly's, I have a horse." "It is 6 hours since the accident," Della said. She did not say the rest of it, but it was present in the pause. "I know, I still have to go." He hesitated at the door. "You will be all right here. There is enough wood to last 2 days stacked right outside. The door latches from the inside and I want it latched. The fire does not need tending for another hour. Mr. Sawyer." She was looking at him with a directness that was slightly unnerving. "Go, I will be fine. Go find out what can still be done for Mr. Holly's." He went. He pushed his horse, a big rangy buckskin named Cord who had the mountain temperament of a creature that understood urgency without requiring explanation, through the snow-packed valley road at the best speed the conditions allowed. He found the overturned stage before he reached the switchback proper, visible from 100 yards as a dark angular mass half in the ditch. He found Holly's inside, still breathing, which was something. The man had a bad gash on his head and was drifting in and out of a murky half-consciousness that Aaron recognized as a serious head injury, but he was alive, and his pulse was steady. Aaron wrapped him in the stage's interior cushioned blankets and went the rest of the way to Harlow's Crossing at a dead run. Harlow's Crossing was a town of perhaps 300 souls clinging to the side of a mountain valley, with the particular determination of Western settlements that had decided they existed and would continue to do so regardless of geographic sensibility. There was a trading post, a livery, a saloon, a small church, a doctor's office, and a scattering of houses that ranged from sturdy to aspirational. Aaron rode straight to the doctor's office, and then straight to the livery, and organized a party to go back for Holly's within the hour. He was back at his cabin by late afternoon. Della had moved from the cot to the chair by the fire, her wrapped ankle propped on the cut log that Aaron used as a footstool. She had found his one small stack of books on the shelf beside the door, and she was reading, and she looked up when he came in with the composed expression of a person who had spent the afternoon achieving equilibrium. "Holly's?" she asked first. "Alive. Dr. Wentworth has him. Head injury, but Wentworth says he has seen men come back from worse." He hung his coat and came to the fire. "He asked about you when he was lucid enough to ask. He was worried." Something in her face softened slightly. "He was a decent man. We only shared the stage for 4 hours, but he was decent." Aaron crouched to feed the fire and felt her watching him. "You will need to stay off that ankle for at least a week," he said. "The roads will not be passable for horses loaded light for another 2 or 3 days in any case." There was another 6 inches up on the higher sections. The silence that followed this practical assessment contained something that neither of them addressed directly for several seconds. "I do not wish to impose on you, Mr. Sawyer," Della said finally. "You are not imposing." He stood. "This is a large enough space for 2 people who mind their own business." She looked at him for a moment, and then the corner of her mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "Then I thank you, and I will try to be useful where I can be." "The reading is use enough," he said. "I have not had a reason to read since November." He made supper and they ate it at the small table, their knees not quite touching under the narrow board surface, talking about the books because it was a safe geography in which to begin knowing someone. She had read more than he had expected, which was considerable. She had opinions that she offered without waiting to see if he approved of them, and when he disagreed with her about the merits of a particular author, she disagreed back with the calm confidence of a person who had been in real arguments, and knew the difference between them and conversation. That night Aaron slept on the floor near the fire with his bedroll, giving Della the cot, and he lay in the dark listening to the wind work itself along the cabin walls and thought about the particular quality of having another person's breathing in the same room. He had forgotten that sound. He had not known he had forgotten it until this moment, lying here listening to it, feeling something in him that had been drawn very tight for a very long time begin, very slightly, to loosen. He woke before she did and had coffee made by the time she stirred, and when she came carefully upright on the cot and located the smell of it, her expression was so genuinely grateful that Aaron had to turn back to the stove. "Where were you headed?" he asked, handing her a tin cup. "Before the accident." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Harlow's Crossing, I have a position there." "What kind of position?" "Teaching, the new schoolhouse. They have been without a teacher since September when the previous one went back east." She sipped the coffee and looked at him over the rim of the cup. "I came from Denver. I have been teaching for 6 years." "Denver," he repeated. "That is a considerable distance to come for a posting in a mountain settlement of 300 people." "I know what you are implying," she said, without any particular sting in it. "You are implying that a woman comes this far only when better options have been exhausted or when she is running from something." He sat in his chair. "Those are your words, but not an unfair summary of what you were thinking." He considered that. "No," he said honestly. "Not unfair." She looked into the fire. "My mother died in October. I had been caring for her for 2 years. After she passed, there was nothing in Denver that required my presence, and a great deal that did not particularly want it." She said this in the level tone of a person reporting facts rather than soliciting sympathy. "I heard about the posting through a friend at the teacher's college. I thought a new landscape might be useful." "Are you someone who needs landscapes to be useful?" She looked at him, and this time the almost smile completed itself fully, and it was a remarkable thing. "I think I might be, yes." They fell into the days that followed with a naturalness that surprised them both. Aaron kept his trapline and cut wood and mended the 2 sections of fence around his small winter paddock where Cord was stabled, and Della, despite the ankle, found ways to be productive that involved less standing than he would have allowed. She cooked, which she did well and without fuss. She reorganized the provisions shelf in a way that doubled its storage efficiency, and saved Aaron approximately 4 minutes a day that he had not known he was losing. She read aloud in the evenings from whatever book she currently held, not performing, simply reading as if they were 2 people who had always spent evenings this way. On the 3rd day, the ankle was better enough that she could move around the cabin without assistance, and she used this freedom to explore the single room with the methodical interest of a person who understood that a space told you something important about the person who had built it. She examined the tools hung in precise order on the south wall. She studied the small, careful drawings pinned above the workbench, survey sketches of the surrounding terrain that Aaron had made over the years as his understanding of the landscape deepened. She found the photograph in the wooden frame on the shelf above the books and looked at it. "Your family?" she asked. He looked up from the harness he was mending. "My father. That is him on the left. He died in the spring of 1883. She looked at the photograph a moment longer. There was a second figure in it, a younger Aaron, barely recognizable in the slenderness of his face. "You built this place after that?" "Yes, to grieve." He was quiet for a moment. "To survive the grief," he said. "There is a difference." She set the photograph back with care. "Yes," she said quietly, "there is." He wanted to ask about her then, about what grief she had survived and by what means, but the question felt too large for the space between them, and so he let it go and she let it go, and they returned to their separate occupations, and the silence was the kind that held people together rather than apart. On the 4th day it snowed again, heavy and continuous from before dawn until well after dark, and the world outside the cabin was reduced to a white featureless softness that pressed against the small windows and made the interior feel like the only warm point in the universe. Aaron checked on court in the morning and came back inside stamping snow from his boots to find Della standing at the stove making something that smelled extraordinary. "What is that?" he asked. "Apple butter," she said. "You have an abundance of dried apples and not enough sugar, but I found the molasses, and the cinnamon is still good." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "I hope that is all right." "It is more than all right." He stood in the middle of the room without taking his coat off because he had forgotten to, and she looked at him standing there with the expression of someone filing something away for later examination. And then she turned back to the stove. That afternoon she asked him why he had come here, not to the mountain in general. She had understood that already. She asked him why he had chosen this specific place, this specific canyon, this particular latitude of loneliness. He sat for a moment before answering. Outside, the snow continued its patient erasure of everything at ground level. "There was a girl," he said, and then stopped, because the sentence tasted strange after 4 years of not saying it to anyone. "We were to be married. In the same month my father died, she told me she would not marry me. I do not blame her. I was not, at that time, a person who was easy to be near." He looked at the fire. "I came here because I did not know what else to do with myself, and then I stayed because it turned out that this is what I am for." "What do you mean, what you are for?" "This." He gestured at the walls, the tools, the evidence of sustained solitary competence. Understanding a specific piece of ground well enough to live on it honestly, keeping things working, being useful to the particular ecosystem of one small mountain valley. He paused. "It sounds meager when I say it out loud." "It does not sound meager," she said. "It sounds like something most people never find." He looked at her. She was looking back at him with an expression that was direct and clear and entirely without the particular species of pity that he had been braced for and despised. She meant it. The recognition of that sat in his chest like the first warmth after extreme cold. "What about you?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. The apple butter made small sounds in the pot. "I was engaged once," she said. 5 years ago. He was a perfectly good man who needed a different kind of woman, someone softer." She said this without bitterness, just the tone of a judgment delivered from a sufficient distance of time. "I think I was always too direct for him, too interested in too many things. He found someone suitable and has been happy as far as I know." She looked at her hands. "I have not been unhappy either, but I think I have been," she searched for the word, "incomplete, in the way that a person is incomplete when they have not yet found the thing they did not know they were looking for." The room was very quiet. Aaron Sawyer, who had spent 4 years learning the precise contours of his own loneliness and had decided that it was simply his permanent condition, sat in his chair and felt something shift inside him with the slow, grinding inevitability of a mountain spring. "Miss Ralston," he said. "Della," she said. "Della." The name felt unfamiliar in his mouth in the way that a key feels unfamiliar before it has learned the particular lock it belongs to. "I should tell you something." She waited. "When I found your boot in the snow," he said, "and I started running, I told myself I was running because it was the only sensible response to the situation, because there was a person in danger and the only ethical course was speed." He paused. "That was true. But when I found you, and you looked at me, and you told me your name, something happened that I do not entirely know how to account for, and I am not sure I should be telling you this on the 5th day of your acquaintance, but I find that I am telling you anyway." Della Ralston looked at Aaron Sawyer with her dark, clear eyes, and her face was still and attentive and neither encouraging nor discouraging. She was simply listening, which was a rare and specific gift. "I do not want you to go to Harlow's Crossing and vanish into a schoolroom and become something I walked past twice a year in the street," he said. "I am aware that is an astonishing thing to say to a person I have known for 5 days. 6, she said. He blinked. 6 days, she said. "You found me on the 15th. Today is the 21st. She looked at the apple butter and stirred it once slowly. "It is not an astonishing thing to say. It is an honest thing, which is different." She set the spoon down and turned to look at him fully. "I find that I do not want to vanish into a schoolroom and become something you walked past either. I find that I have been noticing you very carefully for 6 days and that what I have noticed has been," she chose the word with precision, "compelling." They looked at each other across the small warm room, and neither of them said anything for a moment because there was nothing that needed saying that was not already being communicated by the simple fact of them both being exactly where they were. "I think," Aaron said finally, "that we should take this seriously." "I am not capable of taking things otherwise," Della said. "No," he agreed. "I noticed that about you almost immediately." The almost smile became the full smile again, and it was better every time he saw it. The snow stopped on the 7th day, and by the 8th the valley road below the switchback had been cleared sufficiently by the Harlow's Crossing Road crew, who came up in a horse-drawn grader twice a year with more optimism than machinery, but who generally managed to get things passable. Aaron rode down with Cord to check the conditions and confirm that transport to town was feasible, and he came back in the afternoon to find Della sitting at the table writing letters with the small stub of pencil she had found in his provision box and several sheets of the brown paper he used for wrapping meat. "Writing to someone in Denver?" he asked. "Writing to the school board in Harlow's Crossing," she said, "to confirm my arrival date and ask about the schoolhouse conditions." She looked up, "and writing to a friend in Denver to let her know I am alive, since she was likely notified of the stage accident. You can send them from the trading post when we go in tomorrow." She nodded and looked at him with the expression she wore when she was thinking several things simultaneously and deciding which one to say first. "Aaron." It was the first time she had used his first name without the title, and he felt it the way you feel the first real day of spring, in the chest and the shoulders and somewhere behind the eyes. "Yes," he said. "What is the protocol?" she said carefully, "for a man in your situation and a woman in mine to move forward with any kind of understanding, given that she is about to take up residence in a town 22 miles away, and he lives here in a cabin that is not exactly convenient to social calls?" He sat down at the table across from her. "The protocol, in my estimation," he said, "involves a man visiting that town with a regularity that is probably excessive given the road conditions, but which he is prepared to undertake regardless. And eventually, if the understanding proves to be what both parties believe it to be, a more permanent arrangement is discussed." "A more permanent arrangement," she echoed. She was watching him the way she had watched him from the beginning, with that direct, unclouded attention that was the most disarming thing about her. "You are a careful man, Aaron Sawyer." "I am a man who lost things by being incautious," he said. "I do not intend to lose anything that matters by rushing past it." "That is very wise," she said. "I agree to the protocol." They rode into Harlow's Crossing the following morning, Della riding Cord, while Aaron walked alongside on the packed snow of the road, and the landscape opened up around them as they descended from the canyon country into the valley, vast and white, and impossibly bright under a January sky that had gone the particular blue that only happens in cold country. Della rode well, which surprised him and then did not surprise him. She looked around at the mountains with an expression of open pleasure that Aaron understood deeply, because it was the expression he wore on the inside all the time. "It is extraordinary," she said. "Yes," he agreed, looking at her rather than the mountains. She caught him looking and held the eye contact for a moment, and then looked back at the mountains with a slight color in her face that had nothing to do with the cold. Harlow's Crossing received Della with the particular mixture of practical welcome and avid curiosity that small mountain towns accorded newcomers, especially female newcomers of the professional variety. The school board chairman, a stocky Norwegian named Haver Pedersen who ran the trading post, met them with the broad goodwill of a man who had been trying to fill the schoolteacher position since September and was now looking at his solution with profound relief. He showed Della the schoolhouse, a single-room building beside the church that was clean and cold, and equipped with 11 benches and a blackboard and a small iron stove. Dr. Wentworth appeared to give Della's ankle a professional assessment, and declared it healing satisfactorily. Wentworth also gave Aaron a look of shrewd amusement that Aaron chose to interpret as a simple expression of professional satisfaction. Hollis, the cattle buyer, was ambulatory and lucid and enormously grateful. He was a heavy-set man of 50, with a silver watch chain, and the bewildered expression of a person who had recently become acquainted with his own mortality. He shook Della's hand with both of his, and told her that she had saved his life by going for help, which was generous given that she had gone in entirely the wrong direction, and Della accepted this graciously, and told him she was glad he was recovering. The boarding house where Della would stay until other arrangements could be made was run by a widow named Mrs. Carver, a brisk and formidable woman of 60 who managed the house with the authority of a general, and who assessed Della in about 30 seconds and apparently found her satisfactory. She showed Della to a clean room with a window that faced the mountains. Aaron stayed in Harlow's Crossing 2 nights, sleeping in the loft of the livery as he usually did when business brought him down from the mountain, and those 2 evenings he and Della sat in the small parlor of Mrs. Carver's boarding house and talked. Mrs. Carver was present and appeared occupied with her mending, but Aaron was fully aware that she was monitoring the situation with professional precision, which was fine because everything about the situation was entirely proper and would remain so. They talked about Denver, and about the mountain, and about teaching, and about trapping, and about books, and about the particular texture of grief, and about the strange mercy of change that looks like disaster until you are through to the other side of it. They talk the way 2 people talk when they are discovering that the architecture of another person's interior life matches their own in ways that feel improbable and necessary in equal measure. When Aaron rode back up to the cabin on the 3rd morning, he stopped at the point on the ridge road where the canyon view opened out and he could see, 22 miles distant, the dark cluster of buildings that was Harlow's Crossing against the white valley floor, and he sat on cord for a full minute looking at it before he rode on. He came back in 2 weeks, which he had told himself was a reasonable interval, and which felt approximately twice as long as any 2 weeks he had previously experienced. He brought venison, and a winter-cured beaver pelt for Mrs. Carver as a courtesy, which she received without visible emotion but which Aaron suspected she appreciated. He brought Della a book he had ordered from the catalog a month ago that had arrived at the trading post in his absence, a natural history of the Rocky Mountain region, which he had intended for himself and found that he now wanted her to have instead. She looked at the book and then at him and said, "You ordered this for yourself." "I ordered it 2 months ago," he said. "I think it was probably always meant for you." She held the book carefully and looked at the spine, and then looked at him with an expression that went so far past the almost smile that it became something quieter and more significant. They walked, despite the snow, because she had been asking Mrs. Carver for permission to be out of doors, and Mrs. Carver had been granting it only under conditions of full propriety. Aaron was glad to be the source of the propriety. They walked through the town and along the creek path where the willows made a pale lattice against the snow-loaded sky, and Della told him about the school, which had opened the previous Monday to 14 students ranging in age from 6 to 15, and about the particular challenges of each, described with a warmth and precision that told him she was already deeply invested in all of them. "There is a boy named Thomas Birch," she said, "who is 12 and who I believe is significantly more intelligent than his circumstances have allowed him to develop, and who is resistant to formal instruction in a way that I recognize because I was exactly the same at his age." She was walking with her hands clasped behind her back, her breath coming in small clouds. "I think if I can find the right material, the right angle of approach, I can reach him." "You will find it," Aaron said, with the certainty of a man who had watched her read a landscape and decide it was comprehensible. She looked at him sideways. "You are very confident in my capabilities." "I found you 3 miles into the Beartooth wilderness with a bare foot in January snow," he said. "You were calm, practical, and already formulating a plan. I have been confident in your capabilities since the first sentence you said to me." She stopped walking and looked at him fully, and the light on the snow made everything very bright and clear, and there was nothing between them but the January air. "Aaron," she said. "Yes," he said, which had become, without planning, his response to her saying his name. "I think about you," she said, with a constancy that I find entirely disproportionate given the length of our acquaintance and which shows no signs of reducing. She said this in the level, precise way she said everything important, looking directly at him. "I want to be honest with you about that. I think about you," he said, "every single hour of every single day since you woke up in that ravine, and I am honestly not certain that I slept more than 4 hours on any night of the past 2 weeks." She looked at him for a long moment. "That is not good for your health." "No," he agreed. "It is not." Her expression then was something he would carry in him for the rest of his life, layered and luminous and entirely his. "Then perhaps," she said, "we should stop pretending that this is a slow and careful thing and acknowledge what it actually is." He reached out and took her gloved hand in his, and she let him, and they stood by the frozen creek in the January light, and that was the beginning of the thing being officially itself, named and claimed and real. He visited every 2 weeks through February and March, and on one visit he stayed 4 days because a late blizzard made the road impassable, and he spent those 4 days doing repairs on the schoolhouse roof that it badly needed and sitting in Mrs. Carver's parlor in the evenings, and being subjected to Mrs. Carver's increasingly friendly examination, which was its own form of endorsement. The students at the school appeared to find Aaron's presence fascinating. Several of them came to watch him work on the roof, and the boy Thomas Birch stayed the longest and asked the most questions with the suppressed eagerness of someone who had decided to maintain skepticism, but was finding it difficult. Della had found the right angle with Thomas. She had put a survey map of the surrounding mountains on the desk in front of him, and asked him to describe in writing everything he observed about the terrain that was not already marked on the map, and the boy had filled 3 pages without stopping. Aaron had read what Thomas wrote and found it astute beyond what the boy's age should have produced. He told Della this. "I know," she said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has correctly identified where a thing is buried and needs only to keep digging. "He is remarkable." Aaron began to think about the cabin differently in March. He began to look at it with the eyes of a person asking whether a space built for one could become a space for two without losing what made it itself. He made alterations, not dramatic ones, but considered ones. He built a second shelf for books. He added a window on the east wall to let in the morning light, a window he had always meant to add and had not had a reason to. He built a better table, a real one with 4 legs that did not wobble, from a pine he had dropped in the fall and let cure over the winter. He was aware that he was building toward something and he wanted to do it right. He came to Harlow's Crossing on the first Saturday of April, which had arrived with the tentative warmth of mountain spring, the snow retreating from the south-facing slopes, while the north-facing hollows held their white for another month or 2. He arrived at Mrs. Carver's boarding house in the late morning, and found Della in the schoolyard with her students, who were running some kind of geography game that involved chalk marks on the packed dirt and considerable noise. She saw him come through the gate and her face did the thing it did, that full unguarded thing, and she said something to the students that sent them back to their game and came across the yard to him. He had been thinking about what he wanted to say since February. He had composed it in his head on various early mornings by the fire and on the trapline and on the ride down the mountain. He had discarded and reconstructed it multiple times. What he said when she reached him was none of those composed versions. "I want you to marry me," he said. "I want it with the same certainty I have about anything I have ever known, and I know that is only 3 months, but I also know that 3 months in this particular country under these particular conditions is equivalent to considerably longer in more comfortable circumstances. And I know that I have never been more certain of anything since I knew that this mountain was where I was supposed to be. And you are, Della. You are the thing I did not know I was supposed to be here for." She looked at him for a long moment in the April morning, with the sounds of her students' game in the background and the mountains white and immense above the rooftops of the town, and her expression went through several things too quickly for him to catalog them all. "Aaron Sawyer," she said, "I thought you were a careful man." "I am a careful man," he said. "This is me being careful. I have been thinking about this since February. And this is the most careful version you arrived at." "Yes." She looked at him and she was laughing now, or nearly, the contained mountain lake version of laughter that was one of the things he loved best about her. "Then yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He had not been entirely certain she would say yes, which was how he knew the certainty he had claimed about it was a different kind of certainty, the kind that lived alongside the fear of being wrong and made a home there. He let out a breath he had been holding since approximately February. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. He took her hands in both of his, and they stood in the schoolyard in April, and none of the students paid them any attention except Thomas Birch, who looked over once with the expression of a boy who had already categorized this situation and filed it away for future reference. They were married on the second Saturday of May in the little church in Harlow's Crossing, with Reverend McCaffrey officiating and roughly a third of the town in attendance, which turned out to be most of it since news in a mountain settlement of 300 travels at the speed of light and enthusiasm. Mrs. Carver sat in the front row and wore her best dress and the expression of a woman who had supervised this outcome with considerable satisfaction. Haver Peterson brought an enormous fruit cake. Dr. Wentworth brought a bottle of good whiskey that he presented to Aaron with a bow. Hollies, the cattle buyer, had sent a letter from Billings that arrived the week before the wedding with his congratulations, and a $50 bill, and a note that said that a woman who walked 3 miles through a blizzard on a bad ankle to get help for a stranger deserved every good thing the world had to offer. Thomas Birch came to the wedding with his mother, a quiet woman of considerable dignity who worked as a laundress, and he sat through the ceremony with the attention of someone who was absorbing information. When it was over, he approached Aaron with the solemnity of a 12-year-old who has decided to conduct official business. "I expect you will be taking Miss Ralston away from the school," Thomas said. "I expect she and the school board will work something out," Aaron said. Thomas appeared to consider this. "She is the best teacher I have ever had," he said. "The only good one if you want the honest account. I will tell her you said so." Thomas nodded as though this completed the negotiation satisfactorily and returned to his mother. Della was, in fact, not going anywhere for another month. She had made an arrangement with the school board that she would see the term out through June, staying at Mrs. Carver's Monday through Friday and riding up to the cabin on Saturdays with Aaron when he came down to collect her, returning to town on Monday mornings. It was not a conventional arrangement, but it was a practical one, and Harlow's Crossing was a town that valued practicality above convention when the two came into conflict. Those Saturday to Monday visits established the cabin as something new. Della brought her books up in installments, carried in saddlebags. She brought her blue tin coffee pot, which was better than Aaron's. She brought 3 packets of seeds, 1 of herbs and 2 of the spring vegetables that could survive this elevation, and she planted them in the cleared strip of south-facing soil beside the cabin that Aaron had always meant to use and had not got around to. She reorganized the kitchen area with the same calm efficiency she had applied to the provision shelf 6 months ago, and Aaron stood back and let it happen, and felt the cabin become something that included her as simply and completely as if it had always been designed with her in mind, which he sometimes thought it had been. He just had not known it yet. The summer came in with the force of everything that had been held back, green and furious and brilliant. The meadow above the cabin filled with wildflowers in sequence from June through August, first the blue camas, and then the Indian paintbrush, and then the golden arnica, And Della walked up there on Sunday mornings and came back with her arms full and the expression of someone who has found proof of something she had suspected. She made the cabin into a home in the way that only a person who understands both structure and beauty can do, with practicality and vision operating in the same gesture. The herb garden outside the door grew into something productive and fragrant. A row of clean muslin curtains appeared at the windows, made from cloth she had packed in from her last trip through Billings. A braided rug covered the floor space between the hearth and the table, made over 4 evenings from wool strips she had cut from worn blankets, and it transformed the look of the whole room in a way that was both purely aesthetic and entirely Della. Aaron watched all of this happen and participated in it and contributed to it, and found that the man who had built this cabin in solitary grief had become someone he did not entirely recognize and liked considerably better. In the fall, they took the first trade trip down to Billings together. It was a 4-day journey each way, and Aaron had been making it alone twice a year, packing in supplies that the trading post could not provide. With Della, it became entirely different. She navigated the supply lists with the efficiency of someone who understood both household management and logistics. She bargained in the Billings trading houses with a composure that regularly caught the dealers off guard, accustomed as they were to either deferring women or absent ones. She found a second-hand printing press in a warehouse near the river, one of the small, hand-operated kind, and she calculated out loud for approximately 6 minutes and then turned to Aaron and said, "If the school board will share the cost to us would be $30, and in 3 years I can be printing textbooks for a fraction of what Harlow's Crossing currently pays for them." "Buy it," he said. "I need to check with the school board first. The school board will agree." Haver Peterson has been trying to reduce the education budget for 3 years. She looked at him for a moment. "You know an awful lot about the Harlow's Crossing School Board for a man who lives 3 miles into the wilderness." "I come down twice a month," he said. "People talk." She bought the press. She was right about the school board. They encountered, on that trip to Billings, the harder edges of the world beyond their mountain. There was a group of Crow men camped outside the town, and Aaron watched Della watch them with the attentive, thinking expression she brought to everything she did not yet fully understand. Later she asked him about the reservation policies, about the land confiscations, about the particular and grinding injustice of treaties that were made and broken with a regularity that their side of the arrangement treated as regrettable but acceptable. Aaron told her what he knew, which was not everything, but was more than most men his age had bothered to learn. He told her about the Crow, who had been in this country since before any record that white settlers kept, who had been allied with and then profoundly wronged by the same government that had sent cavalry up the valleys a decade ago. He told her about the winter of 1878, when the Northern Cheyenne had made their extraordinary exodus north from the Indian Territory in Oklahoma, 600 people walking 1,000 miles in the fall and winter to come home to country they were no longer legally permitted to inhabit. Della listened to all of it with her full attention and her dark brows drawn together, and when he was done she said, "And what do we do with that knowledge?" "We hold it," he said. "We do not pretend it is not the ground we are standing on, and where we can do something, we do something." "The school," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for the rest of the evening, and the next morning she found the Crow encampment outside town and spent 2 hours there. Aaron did not go with her because she had not asked him to, and he understood that this was something she needed to do in her own way. She came back with a thoughtful face, and that evening she wrote in the journal she had started keeping since they were married, which she kept in the wooden chest under the cot, and she wrote in it for a long time. She told him the following spring, on a Sunday morning in April when the south-facing slope was showing its first tentative green, that she was expecting their child. She told him the way she told him everything, directly and simply and without performance, sitting across the table from him with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on his face. Aaron had not thought carefully about wanting children, because it had seemed like a country he might never enter, and it had been better not to examine the closed door too closely. When Della told him, he sat for a moment with the information moving through him like warmth moving through cold damaged tissue, that particular deep and expanding sensation, and he said, "Are you well?" "I am perfectly well," she said. "I am happy. I wanted to know if you were happy." He reached across the table and covered her hands with his. "I am," he said. "I am astonishingly, completely happy." Her smile was the full one, the one that completed itself entirely, and it held in it the schoolyard in April and the ravine in January and the firelit evenings and every single morning when he woke beside her and thought with a gratitude that still felt fresh, even now, even after more than a year, that this was real. That spring and summer were active ones. Della continued to teach, and the school had grown, a fact she attributed to improved curriculum and Aaron attributed to Della. Thomas Birch was now doing work that any city school would have called advanced, and there had been a conversation with the school board about whether the county could help fund his further education in a few years. Della had already written to 2 educational institutions in Denver inquiring about scholarship possibilities, with a characteristic lack of patience for waiting and seeing. Aaron expanded the cabin. He had been planning it since winter, and he did it the right way, taking his time with the measurements, sourcing the best timber from the fall cutting he had set aside for this purpose, framing up the addition on the east side of the original structure with 2 new rooms, a sleeping room proper with a real bed off the floor and a window on 2 walls, and a smaller room for what was coming. Della painted the smaller room. Aaron had come back from the trapline one afternoon in August to find her standing on a step stool, her hair wrapped in a cloth, painting a border of mountain flowers along the top of the wall in colors she had mixed from the natural pigments she had been collecting all summer, ochre and blue from clay and copper minerals, soft green from a mix she had worked out herself. It was remarkable work. He stood in the door of the room, and she looked at him from the step stool with paint on her nose and her hands, and that specific expression of absolute absorption in a thing that was working. "Do not say anything," she said. "I was not going to say anything. You were going to say it was too much work. I was going to say it is beautiful," he said. She looked at the border for a moment. "It is, rather," she agreed. Their son was born on the 4th of November, 1888, in the cabin on the mountain, delivered by Dr. Wentworth, who had ridden up the day before at Aaron's urgent summoning, and who performed his role with the competent calm of a man who had presided over a great many entrances and exits in this country, and who found the entrance category considerably more satisfying. They named him James, after Aaron's father. James Aaron Sawyer came into the world at approximately 5 in the morning, in the new sleeping room that still smelled of pine sap and the faint, sweet mineral note of Della's painted border, and he arrived with a significant opinion about the situation which he communicated at volume. Aaron held him first, while Wentworth attended to Della, and he stood in the lamplight with this small, furious person in his arms and felt something so far beyond what he had words for that he gave up on words entirely and just stood there. Della looked over at him from the bed with the exhausted, magnificent expression of a woman who has done something tremendous and knows it. "He looks like you," she said. "He looks like himself," Aaron said. "He looks like James." "Both of those things can be true," she said, which was exactly the kind of thing Della said, and Aaron sat on the edge of the bed and she leaned against him with the baby between them in the November morning, and outside the snow was falling again, soft and steady against the new east windows. Thomas Birch came up to the cabin with his mother the following weekend to meet James, which had not been anticipated, but which was entirely characteristic of Thomas's approach to important events, which was to attend them regardless of whether he had been specifically invited. He stood at the side of the cot where James was sleeping and examined him with the same focused attention he brought to survey maps. "He is very small," Thomas said. "He is presently," Aaron said. "He will get bigger," Thomas said, with the confidence of someone who has researched the matter. He will, Della agreed from the chair by the fire. Thomas seemed satisfied by this. He spent the rest of the visit asking Aaron about the addition to the cabin and making detailed observations about the structural choices. And Aaron answered all of them seriously and thoroughly, because Thomas was the kind of person who deserved to be answered seriously and thoroughly. The winter of 1888 into 1889 was a hard one. The whole territory felt it, ranchers losing cattle in numbers that would not be fully understood until spring, the supply roads in and out of the mountain settlements blocked for weeks at a time. Aaron and Della were better positioned than most because Aaron had been preparing for hard winters since 1883, and his provisions and wood supply were calculated to sustain 2 people plus an infant for considerably longer than any realistic storm scenario. The cabin's walls, which Aaron had built thick and chinked obsessively, held the cold at bay with the solid reliability of the best things built with care. They weathered the winter, as they had learned to weather difficult things, by being fully present in the particular day they were in, and trusting the work that had been done to prepare for it. James thrived in the warmth of the cabin with his mother's assiduous care and his father's besotted attention. He was a vigorous and purposeful infant who seemed to approach every waking moment with the executive intention of someone who had a long list of things to do and preferred to get started. When the spring of 1889 came, it came with a clarity that felt like a reward. The snow on the south-facing slopes melted in the warm mid-March afternoons, and the meadow above the cabin was showing the first green by April. And Della carried James up there on a morning when the air had lost its killing edge, and let him lie on the blanket in the pale spring sun. And she sat beside him with her knees drawn up, and looked at the mountains that stood over them like a formal announcement of scale. Aaron came up the slope with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her, and they drank it in the mountain quiet, while James examined his own hands with absolute concentration. "I have been thinking," Della said. "Tell me, the school needs a second teacher. The board has been discussing it. Enrollment is up to 23 children, and I cannot manage 23 children adequately on my own much longer." She looked at James, who had moved on from his hands to a detailed investigation of the blanket fringe. "There is a woman in Harlow's Crossing, Clara Fields, who has 2 years of normal school training. She would be good. I think I should recommend her to the board." "You should," Aaron said. "It would mean," she continued, with the precision of someone completing a logical chain, "that in another year or 2 I would have enough support in the classroom that I could conceivably reduce my own days to 3 or 4 per week rather than 5, which would make managing the rest of things somewhat more practical." Aaron looked at her. "The rest of things including another child." She looked at James. Then she looked at Aaron. "That is one possible interpretation of what I said." "Is it the correct interpretation?" "It is not the incorrect one," she said, which was Della's way of saying yes when she wanted him to find it himself, and he found it, and he leaned over and kissed her temple, and she leaned against him in the April morning. By the fall of 1889, Della had made good on everything she had intended. Clara Fields was installed as the second teacher at the Harlow's Crossing School, a quiet and capable young woman of 24 who took direction well, and had her own ideas about pedagogy that were generally sound. Della reduced her teaching days to 4 and later to 3 as the new school year organized itself, and she used the time on the mountain productively. The herb garden had become a serious kitchen garden that, through the summer, supplied much of what they needed in the way of vegetables, and Della had begun to develop a quiet sideline in remedies made from the mountain plants she had been studying, which Dr. Wentworth had initially regarded with polite skepticism, and had moved toward genuine endorsement after he had tried several of them. The second child arrived in the spring of 1890, a girl this time, born on an April morning when the meadow was just coming into its first green. They named her Clara May, The Clara for the teacher who had become a genuine friend to Della over the past year, and the May for the month in which Della and Aaron had married 3 years earlier. Clara May arrived with a different temperament than James, quieter and more observing from the beginning, lying in the cradle with her dark eyes tracking movement with an attention that reminded Aaron, the first time he saw it, of her mother sitting across the small table from him on the first evening he had brought her to the cabin, and listening to everything he said with that particular quality of absolute attentiveness. He said this to Della, and she said that was an excessive amount of meaning to read into an infant's gaze, and then she looked at Clara May looking at the firelight and said, "But yes, I see it too." Thomas Birch, who was now 15 and growing into the person Aaron had suspected he would become, came up to the cabin on the Saturday after Clara May was born with a gift for James, which he delivered first before formally acknowledging the infant. On the grounds, he explained, that James would not understand why a new person in the cabin was more interesting than him, and Thomas thought it was important to address this. The gift for James was a hand-carved wooden horse made by Thomas himself, which Aaron inspected with the careful respect of someone who understood woodcraft and found the carving impressive. "You made this," Aaron said. "Over the winter," Thomas said. "How long did it take you?" 3 weeks of evenings, Thomas said without emphasis, which was the way he said everything that cost him something. Aaron looked at the horse. Then he looked at Thomas. "There is a carver in Billings, a man named Esteban Reyes who does contract work for the furniture importers. He makes good money at it, and he is always looking for apprentices." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I am aware," he said, "that I am intended for further academic study." "You are," Aaron said, "and you will do it, but Reyes will be worth talking to nonetheless." Thomas filed this away with the same systematic efficiency with which he filed everything Aaron told him, and then he went inside to deliver the horse to James and to examine Clara May with the detached assessment of someone conducting inventory. The years that followed built themselves in the way that good years build, not dramatically but by accumulation, each season adding to a structure that was becoming more itself with every addition. James at 4 was already following Aaron on the shorter sections of the trap line, not trapping but observing, asking questions with the relentless specific focus of a child who has inherited his mother's determination to understand things. Della said he would be either a naturalist or a very demanding conversationalist, and Aaron said those categories were not mutually exclusive. And she agreed and wrote something in her journal about it that she read to him later that evening that was so exact and affectionate that he had to stand up and go check on the stove, because he was not sure what to do with what he was feeling except stand somewhere that required his back to be to the room. Clara May at 2 was as Della had predicted from the beginning, a watcher and a thinker. She sat in various locations around the cabin and the yard and the garden with the serious patience of a naturalist studying habitat, and she registered everything. And occasionally she communicated her conclusions in the economy of language that was available to her. But these conclusions were generally correct and sometimes surprising in their precision. Della said that Clara May had gotten Aaron's gift for reading a landscape and had expanded it to include people. And Aaron said that sounded like a blessing and a burden in equal measure, and Della said that was true of most good things. Thomas Birch, at 16, had been accepted into a correspondence program through the University of Montana in Missoula, the first such acceptance in the history of Harlow's Crossing's educational system, a fact that Della received with the quiet satisfaction of a person who has done exactly what she set out to do and does not need public acknowledgement of it. She did, however, keep the letter. It was in the wooden chest under the bed, along with the letters from her friend in Denver, and the first note Aaron had ever written her, a 3-line practical message about road conditions that she had kept for reasons she declined to over-explain. Aaron found the note in the chest once while looking for something else and held it for a moment, reading the 3 lines of his own plain handwriting, and thought about the person who had written them, standing in the schoolyard in April 1887, 48 hours after he had asked her to marry him, writing a practical note about road conditions because he was a careful man who had said everything he needed to say in the schoolyard and did not want to crowd it. And he found that he loved that person with the same fullness. He loved the one he had become in the years since. He put the note back and did not mention finding it. And the next morning when Della found him at the table with coffee already made, she looked at him with the expression she wore when she knew something was happening in him that he had not said yet. And he told her that he loved her, which was not the unsaid thing but was a true thing always available to be said. And she said, "And I love you." And they drank their coffee in the morning light that came through the east windows he had put in. The ones that let in the first light because she deserved the first light. And James came in from the sleeping room dragging his blanket and demanding breakfast, and Clara May followed him at her own pace with a stick she had found somewhere and the considered expression of someone deciding what it was for. The mountain held them. The mountain, Aaron had come to understand, was not indifferent. It was simply larger than any individual concern, and what looked like indifference from inside a small grief was simply scale. The same country that could kill you in a January ravine could also hold a cabin where two people had built something daily and deliberate and true. And the same cold that had nearly taken Della had also been the condition under which they had found each other. And Aaron understood now that the boot in the snow had been the beginning of his real life. Not because it was fate in any mystical sense, but because it was the specific moment when the world had presented him with something that required him to be fully what he was. A man who knew this ground, who could run when running mattered, who had made himself into someone capable of being useful in the precise place where being useful was needed. He talked about this to Della on an evening in the fall of 1891, when James was 5, and Clara May was 3, and both children had gone to sleep, and the fire was burning, and the first hard frost of the season had come down from the north and settled over the meadow. He talked about it imperfectly, which was the only way he knew how to talk about things of this size, and Della listened with her feet tucked under her and the firelight on her face and her dark eyes steady on his. "Do you know what I thought," she said, "when you came into the ravine and I looked at you? Tell me." "I thought, this is a man who knows exactly where he is," she said, "not just physically. I mean in himself. I was completely lost in every sense of the word, and you came into that ravine and you were entirely present and certain in a way that I had almost stopped believing a person could be." She looked at the fire for a moment. "It was the most comforting thing I had ever seen, before you said a word." Aaron sat with that for a moment. "I was terrified," he said. "I know," she said. "That is what made it comforting. You were terrified and you were running and you were absolutely there." She looked at him. "That is what courage looks like when it is real." He looked at her across the low table and the firelight, and the 4 years of daily life that had accumulated between them like good stone. And he thought about the morning he had found the boot, about the cold and the weight of the snow and the single warm boot and the decision to run. And he thought that he had made exactly one right decision in the moment that it counted, and that this room and this woman and these sleeping children and this life on this particular piece of ground was what that single right decision had been running toward. "Della," he said. "Yes," she said, which was what she said now, the way he said yes when she said his name, the two of them having arrived in perfect symmetry at the same place by different routes. "I am grateful," he said, "every single day." She unfolded herself from the chair and came to sit beside him on the bench at the table, and he put his arm around her and she leaned against his shoulder, and they sat in the good firelight of the cabin he had built, the cabin that was now entirely theirs, with the frost outside making its patient argument against the glass, and the children breathing in the room beyond the wall and the mountain standing where they had always stood and would continue to stand long after any of this was over. And the warmth of it was complete. In the spring of 1892, Dr. Wentworth retired and moved to live with his daughter in Helena, and before he left, he gave Aaron a complete set of his medical references, the practical guides on wilderness medicine and wound treatment, and the management of the conditions most likely to present themselves in this altitude and latitude, saying that Aaron had been practicing most of it for years and ought to have the official literature. He gave Della a letter of recommendation to the Montana Territory Education Board commending her work in Harlow's Crossing as among the finest he had observed in 14 years in the territory, which was not precisely in his professional jurisdiction to offer, but which was entirely in the spirit of what Dr. Wentworth had always been, which was a man who said the true thing regardless of whether it was his technical business. His replacement was a young doctor named Fremont, fresh from medical school in St. Louis, who was 24 and energetic and somewhat startled by the realities of the practice he had inherited. Della took him under her informal guidance in the first month, not in any formal capacity, but simply by ensuring that he knew everyone in town and that everyone in town knew him, and she introduced him to the local remedies with the same honest evaluation she applied to everything, telling him which ones she believed were effective and which ones she was less certain about, and he had the good sense to listen to her. Hollies, the cattle buyer from Billings, came through Harlow's Crossing twice a year on his circuit and always stopped to see Della and Aaron when they were in town. He had developed the particular warmth toward them that people develop toward those to whom they owe a significant debt that can never be properly repaid, and he expressed this by bringing good quality gifts, including 2 years running a crate of oranges from California that arrived by rail to Billings and were transported north by stage with specific instructions, and which caused considerable sensation at the cabin because James had never seen an orange, and Clara May's assessment of them went through skepticism to a passionate devotion that lasted the rest of the winter. Thomas Birch, at 18, wrote to Aaron from Missoula, where he had been attending the university in person since the previous September on a scholarship that Della had helped him secure through the same combination of strategic correspondence and straightforward advocacy that she applied to any problem she had decided to solve. He wrote that he was studying natural sciences, and that a professor there had looked at the survey drawings Aaron had taught him to make, and had told him they were exceptional. He wrote that he was grateful, in a sentence that was short and precisely constructed and contained more than it said, which was Thomas's way. He wrote that he was grateful to Miss Ralston, as he still called her, and to Mr. Sawyer. Della read the letter and was quiet for a moment, and then she folded it very carefully and put it in the wooden chest. On the 4th of July, 1892, Harlow's Crossing had its annual celebration, a larger affair this year because the territory had become the state of Montana 3 years earlier in 1889, and the civic pride was still somewhat effervescent. There were horse races in the meadow south of town, and a shooting competition, and a supper in the evening in the open air beside the church. Aaron won the shooting competition, which surprised no one and which James, at 6, reported to everyone he encountered for the following week with a proprietary pride. Della organized the school's contribution to the celebration, which was a recitation program and a display of the students' work pinned to a wooden frame outside the schoolhouse door. Clara Fields, the second teacher, had added a musical element, 3 of the students playing fiddle together with a competence that was somewhere between creditable and charming. Mrs. Carver sat in the front row of chairs and ate her apple cake and appeared satisfied. That evening, walking back from the celebration through the blue summer dusk with James on Aaron's shoulders and Clara May on Della's hip, and the mountains fading from gold to gray above the valley, Aaron thought about what Haver Peterson had said to him at the supper, in the gruff and not particularly sentimental way that Haver said important things, which was that the school had changed the town, and that the school being what it was directly Della's doing, and that a town that had a good school was a town that had a future, Aaron thought about that the rest of the way home. He thought about it as he got the children settled and as he made coffee and as he and Della sat on the bench outside the cabin door in the warm July night with the stars overhead and the meadow dark and sweet-smelling. "Peterson said you changed the town," he said. Della looked at the stars. "Peterson is generous. Peterson is precise," Aaron said. "It is one of his best qualities." She was quiet for a moment. "I think the town changed me back," she said. "Equally." She looked at the dark shape of the mountain above them. "I came here to find a new landscape. I found a landscape I did not know I had been looking for, and a man who was part of it and children who are part of it, and all of it has," she searched for the word, "accumulated into something I would not have been able to imagine from the outside. Is that a good thing?" She turned to look at him, and in the starlight her face was clear and sure. "Aaron," she said, "it is the only good thing. It is everything." He took her hand and she leaned against his shoulder the way she had leaned against him on the very first day, when he had been carrying her through the snow, and the gesture contained all of its history now, the fear and the warmth and the discovery of each other and the building of this life, and it was complete. The boot that Aaron had found in the snow 3 miles from his cabin on a January morning in 1887 sat on the shelf above the door for years afterward, next to the mountain survey drawings and the row of books that had grown to fill 3 shelves. Della had retrieved it from the corner where Aaron had set it down on the day they arrived at the cabin and had made some repairs to it and put it on the shelf. And when James was old enough to ask about it, she told him the story with the combination of precision and warmth that characterized everything she told her children. And James listened with the full focus of a child who knows that the story he is hearing is the story of where he comes from. There was the stage accident, she told him. There was the bad ankle and the wrong direction, and the snow and the ravine. And there was a man, she told him, who found a boot in the snow 3 miles from his cabin and who understood from the warmth still held inside it that someone needed help and who ran. Not walked, not rode, but ran with everything he was, through the snow toward a person he had never met, because that was the kind of man he was. And that man, she told James, was his father. James at 7 looked at his father with the specific expression of a child, whose understanding of the person they love most has just deepened by several feet all at once. And Aaron bore the examination with the composure of a man who is fundamentally comfortable being known. "Did you know," James asked Aaron solemnly, "when you found the boot that she would be my mother?" Aaron looked at Della. "No," he said honestly. "I knew that someone needed help and I knew I had to get there as fast as I could. Everything else came after." James considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded with the satisfied expression of someone who has received a fully adequate answer. Clara May, 4 years old, had been listening from her customary position of ostensible inattention, which was to say completely. She looked at the boot on the shelf and then she looked at her mother and then she looked at her father and she said, with the economy of language that was her signature, "Good boot." Aaron laughed. Della laughed. The cabin held the sound of it the way it held everything, completely and warmly, the way a thing holds all the living that has been done inside it. And the mountain stood over all of it in its enormous, patient way. And the boot stayed on the shelf above the door. And the fire burned. And outside the stars over the Beartooth Range were the same stars that had been there before any of them arrived and would be there long after. Indifferent to everything except in the way that beauty is never really indifferent. The way that the right landscape at the right moment is its own kind of answer to questions you did not know you had been asking. And the answer, always, for both of them was yes.